call to order. So we get a roll call.
Chair Schoen.
Here.
Vice Chair Pollard.
Here.
Commission members Thompson. Here. Walker. Here. Williams.
Here.
All present.
Okay. Who wants to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today? Well, you looked at me first, you can do it.
I'll do it. Okay. Please stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with justice for all.
Chair Schoen, do you mind, just as a formality, can you read the top two paragraphs there for the public's benefit?
All right. So, public advisory to City Council chamber will not be open to the public. The City Council chamber will not be open for regular meeting of Streets, Trails, Utilities Commission scheduled for August 3rd, 2020. The meeting will be live streamed through the City of Norco website at www.vimeo.com/City of Norco for public view. The public is invited to participate in public comments by submitting public comments prior to the item being discussed closing by emailing stucommission@ci.norco.ca.us. Please identify the item you are referencing, i.e. general public comments, 2A, etc. Please limit comments to 3 minutes or less. Please submit all comments before 5 p.m. for distribution to the commission. Any comments received after the deadline and before the item has been closed will be read into record. So our next order of business is election of chair and vice chair. Correct?
So at this time, just to help the chairman, is the opportunity for anyone to nominate a fellow member of the commission to be the new chair. Once we put in place the new chair, then we will make an election for the vice chair. So at this time, we would open up any recommendation for a chair, and then would be seeking a second from anybody.
Well, I'll nominate Jim Pollard for your chair.
I second that.
Okay. Is there any other nominations for the chair? Hearing none, then we will do a roll call vote for Jim Pollard to be the chair for the upcoming year.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Let's see. Chair Schoen.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pollard.
Yes.
Okay. Commission members Thompson.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Congratulations, Mr. Pollard. So quickly, we will just move forward to the vice chair, and then we'll figure out what seats we're going to switch out. Is there a motion for a vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Mike Williams.
I'll second that.
Are there any other alternate motions for a vice chair? Hearing none, then we'll move to a roll call vote.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Schoen.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pollard.
Yes.
Commission members Thompson.
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Now, if we could get, well, at this point, we don't have to change chairs. We just acknowledge that Jim Pollard is the chair, and we can run the meeting from Jim's spot. That way you don't have to switch. We don't have to wipe anything down. I think it's probably best at this time until we have a chance to change. In the future, obviously the chairman will be in the center stage and vice chair can be at their leisure either side. Would that work for you, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's your meeting, sir.
Well, thank you very much. So we'll get on with the meeting, and all discretionary actions by the Street, Trails, and Utilities Commission are advisory in nature, and final actions will be confirmed, modified, or delayed, deleted by the City Council. Delayed.
To as far as process, which was read earlier, we have received one public comment prior to 5 p.m., which was provided to you, so it's part of your packet. I don't know if we've received anything since then.
No.
And Shannon indicates we haven't received anything since then, so there's no other further public comments other than the one that was provided to you.
Did Shannon read that out loud, or do I?
No, it's just provided to you.
About the audience that's being filmed, or?
Again, they're just provided to you. That's
Okay.
what we normally do for the council meetings too. They're now provided to the council ahead of time. So they're provided those comments.
So the council members, have they read this from Bonnie Slager? You want me to go ahead and read it? Okay, from Bonnie Slager. I just read through the minutes from the last meeting, and I'm concerned that you would be willing to give up a trail on Kip's Corner from Santa Anita to River Road. We would never give up a trail in Norco. The statement that you do not want the trail because it does not go anywhere is not valid, because we have other trails that do not go anywhere, and this is why I keep trying to get trails connected to create a true trail system. This trail on Kip's Corner is an entrance to our city, and as such should have a trail fencing to identify this area as an entrance to Norco. Please put this item on your next agenda of the Street Trails and Utilities Commission so that it can be discussed before the decision with no input from the community. Thank you, Bonnie Slager.
Right.
Okay, with that, we'll go on to approval of the minutes. Has everybody read the minutes from last month, and do we have any corrections?
Well, as regarding this email from Bonnie, and I want to reading over the minutes on that particular subject. The minutes doesn't seem like they read the way we finished up.
This only has a question of whether or not you have adjustments on the minutes, not necessarily the comments from the public.
I don't know how to adjust it.
Again, what are your concerns about the minutes themselves, not Bonnie's comments?
The discussion mentioned that it didn't need to be a trail because it didn't go anywhere, and we insisted that it needed to be a trail. And it doesn't say that that's what we finished up with, insisting that it stay a trail and get a fence.
Again, there was never discussion about the item that it was or wasn't a trail. We just indicated, as I already, just so you're aware, I already responded to Ms. Slager, indicating that in our general discussion, it was pointed out when we were talking about trail fencing locations that I elected to not put trail fencing there because it leads to nowhere. And subsequent in our discussions as a group, we indicated and acknowledged that as part of the next group of trail fencing, we would just add the trail fencing to that segment. So there was really no, and that's what I related to Ms. Slager in my email to her responding today. So there's no, and that's what we're doing moving forward as far as adding trail fencing to that area. But there was never discussion that it wasn't a trail or being removed as a trail.
Well,
it was just a question in our overall discussion about is why the fencing didn't go in there in that small section.
In the minutes, it states that you said that you would remove it from the, and I don't remember.
No, there was never discussion amongst us to remove something from the minutes. Remove it from the trail system.
From the trail system.
Yeah, that was never a discussion. We just pointed out that at the time when we chose not to put fencing in there is that we didn't want to promote people going that direction when it doesn't lead to another portion of a trail system and it ends. But it's still a trail. It's still parkway. We didn't give anything up. It's just we didn't put fencing up at the time. And then ultimately, as part of our discussion, we said we would for the new fiscal year, which we are.
That was my concern. I just didn't remember what I was reading in the minutes.
Yeah.
Quite going that way. So.
A question, if I could. Was there ever a sign there that said that it was or was not, or that there was a trail at any point?
And when looking at it after staff, there's no sign there. But again, we recognize it as a trail in our system. It's just what we were trying not to do is promote folks actively going that direction because it doesn't go anywhere. we want to say, hey, if people are following the trail system, they'll follow where the white fencing is, in this case, the new white fencing we put up. So we're just visually trying to promote follow the trail system versus make depending which way you're going, heading towards River Road, and then there's nothing there of a trail system. So that was the rationale, but it didn't eliminate anything. We're just trying to promote people to stay within the trail system. Because as soon as you hit River Road, you're out of the trail system. Because there's nothing going west or east on River Road that is a trail. And that was really the sole purpose. But as we indicated in the discussion, I have no problem putting trail fencing up in that section to complete it visually, but we're trying to eliminate the dead-end trails whenever possible. And the thought was, right or wrong, just simply not putting the fencing in doesn't promote it as going that direction when have folks go other ways. And that was really it. So like I indicated to the commission before, I had no problem adding it in, which it's already part of our current CIP plan. But it didn't give up anything. We didn't lose anything or document it. We always recognize it as a segment of the trail.
I guess the confusing part for me was it is listed on the trail plot as a trail.
Which that's what I just said.
Yeah. So, all right.
So going along with what Mike said, for 43 years I lived there, and that's always been a Norco dedicated trail. And in my last meeting,
Well, I want to make sure we're not supposed to be getting into the large discussions. Do you have changes with the minutes? We can have another discussion at the end as far as just general comments, but this is about the minutes themselves.
Got it.
Yeah, I was just concerned with the sentence that Director Blas stated. It was in error and noted that the trail system is a work in progress. I just had a concern with the word that stretch of trail was in error. I think maybe I misunderstood it.
No, I'm going to just look here.
Second line, first paragraph.
Page 2, second paragraph.
First paragraph, second sentence. That's page 2.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, the reality is I'm fine with leaving the statement there. I may have said it, but the reality is we were keeping it in place, not giving something up. So I'll leave it at the discretion of the commission if you want to change the sentence to be something else. Otherwise, recognizing that in the end, our overall discussion about the trails indicated we would put the fencing up in that location.
along with the sign that you took down?
Again, I don't know about any sign that was taken down, but
It was
signs
taken down 2 days after our discussion.
that I don't know, but we determine when and how signs we put up. So we'll determine if there's a sign needed there or not.
What'd the sign say?
Yeah,
No
signs usually
parking
just
on
say
horse
no parking
trail.
on horse trail, so,
Okay, all right.
yeah.
I think if the paragraph was reworded, it does read a little confusing, and I think that would have cleared it up for Bonnie also, that we were going to improve that last little piece in the next fiscal year.
I think what we can do is a lot of discussion on the trails. I think it would be part of the recommendation.
It was also mentioned that evening that the neighbors are using that as an additional parking area. And that was another reason we thought the fence should go back.
How about we put it in the recommendation? Because that's really where we ultimately put it. It wasn't necessarily part of the discussion, it was at the end saying we'll add it in. So as part of the overall recommendation where it indicates that Thompson and Walker to approve overall list of recommended locations with the following locations to be completed first, which is Crow Avenue, Sedona Avenue, 2nd Street, Shadow Canyon Circle, and Circle Court, including Cherokee Lane, and fill in as noted, and then you could say including the section on Kip's Corner between Santa Anita and River Drive.
River Road.
River Road, excuse me.
Yes,
Would that work?
I think
Part of
so.
the recommendation? That way we answer the question overall.
Correct.
Yeah. I'll put including the section on Kip's Corner between Santa Anita and River Road. Does that work? So it's part of the recommendation overall. So that would answer the question. That was a part of the discussion early on. Does that clean that up?
So motion to approve the rest.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams,
Yes.
Commission members Schoen,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
motion passes.
Certify the street sweep.
I didn't really get it.
Chad, did we clarify the street sweeping of public streets, or if there's money for that, or how that's being done?
In regards to what item are you talking
It
about?
was on on page 3, the first Commissioner Walker inquired about submitting requests about the street sweeping. Page
We
3.
are already done with the minutes,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
I would say keep your question to the end about the minutes, because we already approved the minutes as far as changing them, but
Okay, you're right.
I'm not sure what the question is. But I would say make a note of it and let's talk about it at the end.
Okay. Discussions, actions, and items on item 3A, Tree Planting Technical Advisor Council.
All right, thank you. So this item is one that's been a long time coming. As you know, the city received a grant from CAL FIRE to plant trees. And we got that early last year. We've since then been making efforts to gather data from the public regarding their interest in trees. As you probably know, recall, we have been removing quite a bit of the trees. I would estimate at least 800 trees have been removed to date over the last 5 years. We have a very aging forest. It's about 10,000 trees, so we probably have a little over 9,000 at this point. And they're all very old. A lot of them have reached their maturity and are barely hanging on, either breaking or collapsing, hollow, diseased. So we've been, the city and actually SCE, who has created some of these issues where the trees have become unhealthy because they've topped them, the canopies, and made them structurally weak, etc., through their right-of-ways under their power lines, etc. So we've been little by little removing trees all over the city. But our goal has always been to try to get a program up and running that would plant trees. A grant came along that we applied for, that we were successful in getting. It was done through the city manager's office through Roger Grody, who's our economics advisor. He applied for the grant, and what he proposed for was 1,200 trees, which is a pretty lofty effort to plant 1,200 trees. It's a 3-year program. We're currently through the first year already. So we have 2 years to get it done, which shouldn't be a problem of planting trees. The question was really about who's interested in the trees. Most of our parkway doesn't have dedicated irrigation. There's almost none other than the LMDs that has dedicated irrigation. So any of the areas, and most of the LMD areas is not where we'll probably plant trees because they have dedicated irrigation and maintenance. Most of the areas are doing pretty good with the trees. The only one exception is LMD2, which recently had their water turned off because of lack of funding. So the trees and plants are dying in that area. But it's unlikely we'll put water in or trees in those areas because there's no watering. So in general, we're looking for a lot of locations to place a lot of trees. Just so you're aware, unfortunately, this grant doesn't allow anything more than 15-gallon trees. CAL FIRE's grant simply says they feel that there's a better opportunity for growth if the trees aren't as mature as we'd like. We get required about 24-gallon trees or larger to have a more mature established tree because we've taken out a lot of large old trees that were 30 feet high. We're not looking to go back with trees that high because those prove to be a lot of the problems, especially in underwire areas. But we're limited to 15-gallon trees, so we have to plant 1,200 trees with the money that they've been provided. So the task is pretty daunting as far as how we can, with the funds provided, plant all the trees, which is 1,200 trees or close to that. They're willing to accept something less, but they're not giving us a defined number. They want to hear what our plan is after we've basically done this technical advisory meeting. That's one of the requirements of the grant, is we said we would have this technical advisory meeting to basically discuss how we would implement the program. But I want to give you the basics. It was 1,200 trees. We're limited to 15-gallon trees. We can plant them in any public facility, meaning it could be parks, it could be parkways, it could be on public buildings. It's anywhere that the public has access. Originally we thought, hey, if people want to put these on private property in the front of their yard, let's try that. But they basically said, since the public needs to have access to the tree, I don't think you folks want people showing up at your house to do a picnic under a tree that's in your house. So it's limited to parkways. So in our initial effort, we did reach out to did a survey to the public. We had it out for about 3 months, asking the public's interest if they wanted a tree. Our current urban forest plan that this commission adopted a couple years ago basically requires that if somebody wants to plant a tree, they have to provide watering to it. And so we made that as part of our survey as a condition, as if you want a tree, are you willing to provide irrigation to it? Whether it was already existing or you were going to bring out irrigation to the parkway, are you willing? So we had about 200 people say they were interested and willing to do that, to get a tree or trees, depending on how much space they have. Our plan does include spacing of trees to make sure that we don't have too much crowding. So we do require that as far as determining how many trees a person may get. So we had about 200 people. So assuming everybody gets at least one tree, that still leaves 1,000 trees to put up. A daunting task. We might put about, in talking with the Parks Department, we might put about maybe 300 trees in the various parks. Because there's dedicated irrigation, it's easier to handle. Still, a lot of trees to handle. It only takes us to about 500. We still have about 700 trees left. And how to put that many trees in when there's no sign of, is there going to be dedicated irrigation, or how we would water those trees to at least hopefully get them established and live on their own. So, and again, we're limited as far as dollars. Our total grant from CAL FIRE was $242,000, almost $243,000, with our matching of $81,000. So we only have about $330,000 total to do this project. So it may take more money from other sources to make this successful, which we'll discuss later. What I want to focus on today, in order to get this program off the ground, is just give you the base work that we've done, which we've told you the number of trees we have to plant, the limitation in size, which will definitely limit its success rate as far as the tree growing, the amount of people who've chosen to want to participate at this time. It doesn't mean more won't participate once we have a physical program off the ground and they start hearing about it. But I don't think it's going to be another 1,000 people. So what we want to do today, and the goal of this today, is to determine a palette. My goal is to create probably a palette of 3 trees that ultimately, because the goal is going to be that we get proposals from outside vendors to purchase the trees, plant the trees to our standard, and also potentially even water the trees. And that's one of the things we're going to discuss with our panel of experts that I've asked to participate today. The five fine folks out here, and I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves. It's basically, these are experts in the field that have an interest in certainly the community and its beauty, but specifically trees. And I would like to get their feedback to provide to you as the commission of what their recommendation is on a tree palette. Again, we don't want to have a process where I've got a palette of 10 trees that the residents can pick from. We want to make it small. We want to be concise. We want to get a defined cost from, because again, you might pick 10 trees that have 10 different costs, but if we can bundle in certain types of trees and they're similar costs, it's easier for me to create budgets and determine what that's going to be. Plus, they usually also can get better prices if they're getting a large number of trees rather than spreading them out in different places. But again, this is going to be an overall discussion. I want also their feedback as far as if that's too limiting. Maybe you need 5, and to give a better spreading of the types of trees in here. A lot of problems we have right now is we've had the wrong tree in the wrong place around the city. We want to make sure we have the right tree in the right place, so it has the long-term ability to grow. It's not going to be impacted by overcrowding. It's not going to be something. Again, if we're choosing trees that we've already looked at, these are the trees that we feel are not harmful or inhibits our equestrian lifestyle that we promote here in the city. We eliminate some trees that provided that are indicated that could be health risks because they have certain things that drop and horses may eat them and get poisoned, et cetera. So we've tried to eliminate here what is a hazard, and so this is, like I said, we updated this a couple years ago. I did provide this urban forest specification standards to all the panel to review. I do want to apologize. This should have been included in your packet, but it wasn't. You've seen this before. Some of you have been on the commission at the time. I provided you a hard copy of this today, so I do apologize. It did references in the staff report, but it wasn't included in the packet, and it should have been, so that was our oversight. But you do have it in front of you. We'll also have it on the screen available to review any of the particular trees that we discuss. One of the bigger issues I have for the panel's benefit to think about, but also yourselves, is assuming that nobody else is interested in watering the trees themselves, is how do we establish this? How do we get a tree to establish? My only assumption is, as a novice in this field, is that we're probably going to have some sort of watering program that we hire whoever the consultant would be who plants the trees will also have to probably manually water the trees. Whether that's viable or not, I don't know. Again, this is my first time talking to this panel too. So it'll be an open discussion to answer those questions. So some of the things I'm looking for the panel to provide is hopefully trees from this packet that we've already approved that would be reasonable to use in lining our trail system and or our parkway that may not have a trail against it, because we haven't defined where these trees will go. And then also, how do we water it if no water is available? Can you successfully manage a young forest that you've planted by hand watering it, but for how long? How long do we do it? Is it once a week for 6 months, once a week for a year, 2 years? I don't know. And that's why I'm looking for the panel's feedback to tell me what our restrictions are and how we're going to make this happen, because ultimately, in the end, I'm going to take their feedback and information, and also yours, to basically indicate, here's our ultimate likely plan. And then I'm going to put a financial dollar to that. I'm going to have to figure out what it ultimately costs to figure out the proper plan to plant these trees to reestablish and replenish our forests is going to cost X. And whether or not it meets and is in the dollar figure that we have now, or we need more, that's something we'll present to the city manager, eventually some point council, to say, here's the actual program for the cost for the program. how would you like to fund it if you want to move forward? We have some funding, but we clearly need more because it doesn't meet with the funding we got doesn't meet the needs. So I'm not limiting what we're trying to do by dollars right now. I just want looking for is the experts' opinion about how we could effectively create a program to try to utilize the grant money that's been and the restrictions that have been applied to us, in addition to money that we will have to put forward, not limiting what we talked about here. It's whatever money we have to put forward to try to use the grant money. And I will ultimately figure out dollar-wise what that costs, and obviously be a future discussion for us once I get information from the same experts, especially the consultants, as far as here's our proposal, how we would do that based off of the plant palette, the recommendation that you came up with to water X amount times, etc. So with that, what I'd like to do, with your permission, Chairman Pollard, is we'll introduce our panel first and let them introduce themselves. And then we'll, I think the best methodology is give each panelist an opportunity to answer the specific questions that we posed today, which is give us a recommendation for the trees that they would recommend. And it's their choice, anywhere from 3 to 5 trees that we should look from our palette at this time. And then give their thoughts about how we deal with trees that don't have defined watering, and give us information about what they think, how those trees should be watered, frequency, etc. And that way we can write our notes from each speaker and then talk about maybe a consensus amongst the information. But my goal is to have the panel give their information first, and then we can ask follow-up questions after that if we seem to not really have a consensus, and obviously get feedback from the trees that they maybe recommend, and whether you agree or disagree with them or not. But keep in mind, we've already selected the trees that we would accept in the city in this urban forest specification standards. So these are the trees we've already defined were there. With that said, and for the benefit of the panelists, this doesn't hold us to this list. But my concern is I don't want to deflect from our purpose of this meeting, is to develop a plan. We can always come back and talk about modifying the specifications to identify maybe other trees that might be as good or alternates that we should look at. We can have a further discussion on that. And also how we've developed in here is also how we plant those trees. I know there's interest from at least one of the panelists to have that discussion that and it's reflected to me that our planting standards are kind of out of date or antiquated, that maybe we should update them. What I explained is that at this particular meeting we probably wouldn't have that discussion because I want to focus on that, but doesn't mean we may not want to have a future discussion to say, hey, you know what, we have a plan here, that's great, we have a plan, but maybe we need to update it, especially since we have some experts in hand, but we might be able to do another meeting to discuss those topics if that's a pleasure of the commission. Again, it's not often that we get 5 people in a room that are experts in the field to give us feedback on a document that we created that honestly was just a rehash of prior document. We on our own cleaned it up and made some changes. So if there's feedback from our experts, I would assume we'd want to take advantage of that, whether that's submitting something later with comments and edits that we can provide to you as suggestions that we then have a full discussion on. But for tonight, I'm not looking for that in detail discussion about the meat and potatoes of this document when it comes to the planting palette, planting the trees. I want to focus on the trees themselves and which one should we plant, which one would be most effective, best chance to mature, with a plan of how do we water them, knowing that, assuming for our benefit, the entire project has no watering that's dedicated on site. How would we do that? So with that, if you don't mind, Chairman Pollard, that I will ask each panelist to introduce themselves and give their background, and then we could start individually on giving their feedback regarding our questions today.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the presentation.
First, want to come up here and we'll...
I can stand here.
All right, that's good too.
My name is Patrick Mitchell. I'm a resident of Norco. I actually work for 5 key schools and programs. I manage their ecological agriculture training center here in town at the old library. I have about 30 years experience in ecological horticulture. I'm not an arborist. but I do have 20-plus years experience in native habitat restoration, particularly in my... I've got a little background there. I spent the last 10 years as a farmer. I've managed stone fruit orchards and citrus orchards, so I've got a little bit of tree experience in that background, but I thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this. I watched lots of trees come down in town, and I'm
Yeah.
Can you hear me better now? Is it on?
It's on, yeah.
All right.
I'm sorry, I have hard of hearing you.
Me too. How about if I do that?
That's fine.
All right. Tracy Takeuchi, I'm an agricultural biologist, certified arborist, pest control advisor, and qualified pesticide applicator. I lecture in agriculture for Cal Poly Pomona. I teach plant identification, weed science, Plant Science 1, arboriculture, among others. My background is I've been licensed for about 30 years, 28 years, and have also maintained my own consulting business for the past 28 years doing tree health for residential and commercial clients. Is that it? That all you need?
Good, thank you.
Awesome.
No, perfect.
Good evening. Tim Crothers, West Coast Arborist. My title is Plant Healthcare Manager. I've been with West Coast for about 8 years. My background is degree in environmental horticulture science from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. I've worked in the landscape construction, landscape maintenance, and now in the tree industry. Board certified master arborist, tree risk assessor. So in my duties, I manage the crews that are actually treating the trees for insects, pests, disease. I also manage the consulting arborists that work at our company, the data collectors that go out and GPS the trees, do tree inventories. So that's kind of my background, passionate about trees.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Mader. I'm the branch manager for the local Brightview Landscape Services. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. Not actually probably one of the few not certified arborists here, but I've been working in the industry for about 20 years, and my side of it is a little bit more of the practical side as opposed to the overall growth of the tree. One of the benefits of having Brightview here is that we do maintain the city for you. We do know what trees are already in the city. We do know what issues we have out there, and we've been helping the city along for quite a while on those issues.
My name's George Magana. I'm the president for Nova Landscape Group. We're actually the contractor maintaining your trails at the moment. I have about 20 years experience also on the maintenance side. Don't quite have the pedigree that some of these folks do, but I'm glad to have them here. But very similar to what Anthony mentioned, I have many years. I have about 15 years managing the contracts for the city of Norco and maintenance as well, so I'm very familiar with what's out there, what's working, what's not working. We've done a similar project to this some years back. I think it was through Parks because I worked with Brian Petrie on it. And absolutely the discussion on pallet is very interesting. I would, just real quick to throw this out there, think that we should look at maybe having multiple pallets based on size and location. I think that would be a big thing. It's for guys like us, it's really about the survivability, what's working out there. You got to live with it and make sure it's going to work overall and what's going to happen moving forward, and having a lot of history, seeing things that have worked here. That and the water thing, absolutely, I would leverage as much as you can where you have existing irrigation, and then put that plan in place. In terms of the pallet and pricing, it would still be okay for you to be able to put it together. It's typically the price is based on the size of the trees. So if you're sticking with 15 gallon, I think the pallet, it could still be open and still you can get a comparable price from everybody. But the water is going to be the biggest thing, and I think that with the experts you have here, if you wanted to revise that document, you probably can do so. But in terms of maintenance, putting those things in, there's a couple different ways I think we can look at this, and we have quite a bit of history on that, having done it before.
So since you're already standing up and you're the last one, let's just jump into that discussion.
Okay.
For the benefit of the commission and your peers.
Okay.
I want to understand, and again, as a novice and trying to just get this grant moving, I was looking at a plant palette of maybe 3 to 5 trees. When you just confused me when you said multiple pallets, gave an impression of a lot more trees. What do you mean by that when you say multiple pallets? So you understand.
What I would say is, like, let's look at parkways as an example. So if we're going to put trees in parkways, we got to consider the route structure, where it's going to go in terms of the trail and equestrian traffic, in terms of vehicular traffic. If we're putting a tree in a park, we maybe have a completely different way of looking at it. You got, a lot more open space. So what I meant by having multiple pallets was maybe based on if it's going to go in a parkway, or it's going to go a park, or if it's going to be near or adjacent to a structure, a building, something like that, where you can say, okay, if I have a park, then maybe you can limit it to 3.
So just for clarification, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Parks Department will choose the trees that they want. They're just going to simply decide where they want to place trees, what open space they have, and they will choose the trees that they want, and they're going to select those. I'm mainly focused on this purpose is just parkways, because that's the only place we're going to put those other than the parks is in the public right-of-way in the parkways.
Okay.
So for our discussion here, let's all focus on the understanding that this is just going to be the parkways, because parks will choose whatever trees they want within the park system. Whether it's on this list or not,
Right.
they're going to ultimately choose the trees and how many they can handle through this process. But it'll be independent of this discussion. This is to try to, knowing they're going to probably do about 300 trees is what I'm estimating at this point. We've still got, the remainder 900 trees to put out there. So knowing it's going to be in the public right-of-way only, and it could be against a trail or not against a trail, but it's in the public right-of-way,
Right.
against the roadway. It's not going to be in medians or anything like that because we don't really have any. How would we create, or what should we have in that palette that's for the public right-of-way?
Typically what I would do, because we have our street trees, and that really illustrates, based on where it's going, the varying growth patterns that you're going to see from those trees. But I typically would look at what trees are already out there and what are working. Especially you kind of try to put something that's already there so it kind of fits in. There's certain trees that we put a lot of that we've seen historically do well, like Chinese pistache, the red buds. So there's a few, catalpa, but there's a few that we have out there that do well, and there's a whole list of street trees which is pretty extravagant. You can narrow that down.
Again, let me clarify. Unfortunately, we don't have an organized forest. So we literally have trees of every type everywhere. There is no consistency in our trees, down our roads, or anything like that. So unfortunately, I think looking at what's in every area is not functional, because every street will be different. And I don't want to create a program where we literally have to customize everything based off of every street.
Right.
It will take a tremendous amount of time for us
Right.
as staff to implement that. And our goal is really to basically say, in the end, is hire a contractor, here's the approved palette, work with the resident, and we'll work with the resident, pick your tree of the palette, and then you guys who would install it and potentially be watering it for X amount of time.
Right.
So, and again, these are my ideas throwing out just to get this done and simple. I had envisioned not creating a long process of bureaucracy of customizing the areas. And it's only because of lack of the time that we have to go out and customize it. That's why I want to focus on trying to find out 3 to 5 trees that work for Norco. They're good trees regardless, and that's what we'll try to put in. As much as I would like to kind of streamline certain trees on this street only and that street only but there's literally all kinds of trees everywhere, and there is no rhyme or reason way that it was done. So
Yeah.
again, I don't want to not take your idea to heart. I just see it making it a lot larger of a project. So again, if we can focus on if we're limiting it, you guys, the experts, to give me 3 to 5 trees that you think are functional, and whatever you define that is, and that they have a chance to grow, whether or not they do or not provide shade, related to the trail, obviously, and whatever conditions that you think we should look at. Again, I apologize, I'm not an arborist, but I want to focus us to not get too broad.
Yeah, but so I would still urge you guys to look at a dozen then, and that you might get a different opinion from other folks. But
I just said is 3 to 5 makes sense, but if you think it doesn't and it's manageable, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I personally, my opinion, again, and you have a lot of better qualified perhaps folks in terms of that specifically, but my opinion would be to at least a dozen trees. Okay. It's a significant number of trees that you're putting in, and it doesn't really, again, if you're doing a consistent size in terms of price, or even the installation process, or even in terms of the management afterwards, I think your focus really should be on your management practices afterwards, so that for the sustainability factor. Yeah, I think your list of street trees, it's pretty standard. And again, you may have some that have done better than others out there, but those typically will fit the dynamics of what you're looking for in terms of overall height, in terms of not so aggressive roots. There's certain things that list already fits in. I think narrowing it down to 12, they may have a different number, but I just think going less than a dozen is kind of limiting for that number of trees all throughout the city. Okay. If you don't want to see a red bud, those 3 repeated everywhere you go in a forest. So, gotcha. But again, so in terms of that, what trees, that would be my recommendation. Okay. Maybe to narrow the palette, but not that severely. Okay. In terms of the watering, initially, it really depends on how soon the project gets started. So if it got started today, it's 100 degrees, and it's going to be so for a while, then your maintenance practice is going to look a certain way. So depending on when it gets started, it's very difficult to say, well, it's got to be watered at this fashion. So you may be able to say, well, during these inclement weather, during this or during that, here's what our recommendation should look like. But I think most of the folks here would kind of already understand that practice. I think really the duration is going to be the key. So again, if there is irrigation, if there is an irrigation, or if it's sloped, if it's in an area that where soil maybe perhaps is slightly less desirable than other areas, each tree is going to need to be looked at very carefully and evaluated on how it's doing. And then I would also expect a certain amount of loss. So if you're doing 1,200 trees, 50, that's a lot of trees. I would recommend that you plan around a certain percentage of loss, because it's natural. That's a lot of trees to keep look at. Some of them, it may have just been the tree itself. Some of them, it may have been it didn't get something that it needed. But I think that's where you should focus a significant amount of time in what that maintenance program looks like. I think it should be probably a 6-month process. Or in terms of helping them get established. Again, some may be doing well quicker, but I think if you go less than 6 months, that you may struggle.
It's 6 months of what frequency?
Again, it depends on the time of year.
But give me a default. What would you do as a minimum?
3 times a week.
3 times a week?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So it was what trees, thoughts on watering, and I think that may have been the only 2.
That's fine for now. Okay. Like I said, it's just to start the initial discussion, we'll start up again.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate your time.
Yep, no worries.
I kind of agree. I think more tree diversity is going to be beneficial, especially when you're in a situation where you're relying on other people to care for those trees. You don't necessarily have the long-term staff to go out and make sure those trees are being cared for properly. I feel like one of the things I see that's missing here, and this is my background, is native trees. My experience is some native trees do really well in public right-of-ways, and I would recommend taking a look at that, but I really would agree that I think you probably want to look at 10 or 12 types of trees instead of 3 or 4 or 5. One of the issues is you get a pathogen or a pest that comes in and it wipes out your whole forest if you've only got 1 or 2 or 3 kinds of trees. With that diversity, some of your forest survives, and you then can come back and look at it. So I recommend more. I would add some native trees to it. Again, that we're close to the river. I think you get a lot of ecological service from putting in some native trees, and so that would be my recommendation. I think the other nice thing about natives is their establishment period is a little quicker, and then they require less maintenance in the long run.
Do you have an example of a native tree that's not on our list that you'd recommend?
Platanus racemosa, the native sycamore, any of the quercus, the oaks, things like that. They're a little slow growing, but once established, they make a beautiful forest. They're great for birds, great shade. So those would be some of my recommendations. And I'd be happy to kind of give you some, a written recommendation of some of those in the long run.
Okay. Do you have any feedback regarding the watering on how we would, because again, recognizing we have nobody wanting to water them, how do we try to make this last?
You know, I think I've seen great success in some larger urban cities with a water truck once a week. It's not pretty, it's not ideal, but it's functional in the short term. You know, what an undertaking it would be to have to develop irrigation for 1,200 trees. So I mean, I think you really have to get creative and look at some ways to do that. I think it can be done. I think one of the things I like about this city is that there's some interest in the community and being involved in some of this. So maybe there's some community groups that can help with irrigation and things like that. But really, I think probably you're going to have to focus on the contractor that installs it to do a certain period of maintenance and establishment.
So you think once a week for potentially 6 months?
It depends on the tree species and you know, when you're putting them in and a lot of different things. But I think if you had a 1-year contract for...
Keep in mind, ultimately what I'm trying to do is a actual proposal that I can give to providers that says you're going to purchase these trees, you're going to plant these trees,
right,
and you're going to water these trees.
Right.
And unfortunately it won't be a variable, well, we don't know because it depends on the trees. I have to have a default, assume X, assume Y, and give me your proposal.
I think when you have your palette, you kind of have an idea. You can really, based on what that palette ends up being, develop a best practices for irrigation, but I think it's going to be a challenge.
Right. So. Yeah, our watering's our biggest challenge by far.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Try to do that. I have mixed feelings about some of the comments made. First of all, I would go through the list and immediately eliminate quite a few that are potential disease and insect problem trees already that are on the list, and eliminate those. If you want to go in the direction of natives, then I suggest that you evaluate those natives very critically. Oaks have specific concerns and issues associated with them. One of those issues being that they are a preferred host for the polyphagous shot-hole borer, an invasive beetle that is affecting those trees, as is the native California sycamore, Platanus racemosa. I would not recommend including those unless you want to get onto a pesticide treadmill and hire West Coast arborists to be doing tree cambial injections of pesticides on a routine basis. So I would look from that perspective. I would also look at the list from the perspective of water needs and future climate shift issues. Some of the trees on the list, such as the magnolia, the bull magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora, is a very water-using, consumptive tree to establish well and to look well in the landscape. So I would eliminate some of those type of trees. Some of the trees have some nice attributes that you have on your list, such as the Tipawanu tipu, excuse me. Some may not agree with the structural security of that tree, but it is a leguminosae, a fabaceae tree, which means that it does not especially require supplemental nitrogen to support its health. It produces its own through a bacterial association on its roots. So an associate of mine and I did a climate-ready tree study, including several north-south facing streets in Norco, Simi Valley, and Ventura, where we evaluated street trees and residential trees along those roadways for health during the height of the extreme drought ending approximately 2016. We found that some of the trees on your list are doing pretty well in a long-term drought with low to moderate amounts of supplemental irrigation. We found the Morris alba, the white mulberry, which is probably not a choice for you. It's not on your list. That would be a tree that would do well in a drought situation, but has invasive roots, as does the, if not most all, ash trees, some of which are native, like the velutina, Fraxinus velutina, not on your list. You don't also have Lagerstroemia, crepe myrtle on your list. That would be a potential addition. Drought hardy, looks attractive, has nice flowers, grows to a small stature, a variety of color options in bloom. So those are some considerations. Liquid amber styrosiflua is on your list. I would eliminate it immediately. Another major host for a couple of diseases and insects. I like the Chinese Zelkova serrata. Some moderate to mild insect infestations on that tree occasionally. So you could go again through the list and looking just at the list that you have, eliminate some trees for fruit or flower issues, disease or insect issues, invasive root potential, and then circle back around looking at whether or not, as climate shift persists, these trees will tolerate increasing hot temperatures. We noted that on average, the temperature requirement in evapotranspirative moisture is about 55 inches of moisture in Norco. So these trees will have to be supplementally irrigated, as you've noted, 2 to 3 times a week for establishment purposes, depending on the species. Once established, some of the trees selected would not require future regular irrigation if they establish well and properly. The 15-gallon size allows for the root system to develop the most efficiently, the most rapidly, and with the least amount of distress to the tree, so long as it's given appropriate amounts of irrigation during that establishment period. What I don't know and can't know until you purchase trees or investigate the purchase of trees is in what kind of medium are they planted in that container, and is that going to influence their successful establishment? That would be something I would look at. There are interface issues between potted medium and native mineral soils that can be problematic if they're not looked at, addressed, and paid attention to during the irrigation establishment phase. Beyond that, I'm happy to advise on any number of the trees on this list. I know most of them. Some of you have good experience with some of these trees that I find to be beautiful trees, but not necessarily the easiest to establish well. For example, the Chinese pistache, beautiful tree, awesome structure when it's trained properly early on. If it's not, it can be a nightmare to maintain. So that would be a tree that would require early establishment pruning to maximize the benefit in the landscape. I agree that 3 to 5 trees is probably a limited palette. Again, when you look at the polyphagous shot-hole borer and invasive shot-hole borer issues, which Norco has only a minor infestation to date, which is excellent, those particular invasive beetles have a host range of about 50 species, many of which are California native species. So we want to look at, as others have mentioned, having a broad palette enough to give us some insulation against a major new invasion of pests or diseases, so that the injury or future costs associated with maintaining those trees is moderated. Helps?
Do you have a thought as far as, or a guesstimate of how long the watering should occur? And I know you said 2 to 3 times a week, but what duration do you think we should assume that we need to be committed to doing on planting these trees?
So depending on the specific locations, there's going to be wide variability in the need. So if a tree has, for example, gravitational water that it has access to from the property, it will require less irrigation as that water moves through the soil profile towards the tree once it's becoming established. A tree that has absolutely no surrounding access to any irrigation will require much longer support. Typically, if the trees are not bare rooted out of the can, in other words, removing all of the competitive medium so that the root system is planted in native site soil, it will require probably 2 or 3 years on a regressing scale of irrigations to establish those trees. But again, regressing, and it's based on how well those trees are establishing in that location. If you bare root those trees, they will require very careful monitoring in advance or during the establishment period because they will have had root injury. The benefit of removing the medium from the can when you expose those trees is that you can prune, remove, and correct any of the roots that have already begun to circle in that can. Those roots will never correct. They will never straighten out. They will always be weak. And if they are not corrected, those trees will be future subject to wind failure, wind throw. So by bare rooting them, you do have a better establishment overall, but care must be taken in the initial establishment because you do injure the root system by removing some of the root system that's injured in the can, in the pot, as it's growing. Long term, it gives you a better established plant.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay?
Jim?
Okay, so I'm ready to give you my top 10 trees, if you want to put stars next to those.
Sure. Well, I guess the question would be, because I think what I'm gathering here already from the experts is that all of you think that we should have a wider palette. So what I'm going to suggest, since it's going to be a much broader list and for the benefit of the commission, is that that we communicate individually, that I get your list individually of whatever number of trees that you would suggest, keeping it probably 10 to 12 trees, and then whether it's on this list or not, if you can list them as native, maybe not on our list, or even suggesting ones that we possibly should consider removing. But I think that might be more functional. That way I can make a more concise list that we bring together at another meeting that we can review, rather than us writing down all these trees at this point, because now I think it's expanded. And let's be honest, these names are complicated. I can't say them, let alone write them. So I think what might be best, if the commission's okay with this, is that, again, we'll continue with the discussion about how we go forward, but at least getting you information at a supplemental meeting. And then we won't be waiting. My goal is not to wait to the next meeting. We'll have probably a supplemental meeting within the next 30 days where we talk about this again outside our regular meeting. Well, we'll have more information. I'll be able to provide it. Here's the palette that, or plants that have been suggested, and then we'll go through that discussion again as a group to find out which ones we want to narrow down to. Plus also talk about other issues, but I think we need to, it's getting broader. We need to kind of refine the list, and I don't want to do that all in this case tonight since it's gotten fairly big. So if the group's okay with that, that way you don't have to name all the trees, but I would like to hear your thoughts about what your other panelists have said as far as that you agree with that we should be a larger palette?
Larger palette, yes. I think 3 to 5 is too limited. 10 to 12 is more ideal, actually. And all the trees that you've got on here pretty easily obtained in the nursery trade, with the exception of maybe a couple, are starting to get a little hard to find. So I have no problem with the availability, the size, 15-gallon. I would agree with the others. That's an appropriate size to plant. Okay. We plant 15-gallon trees all the time, and they establish just fine. I planted 15-gallon or smaller trees in my landscape and they established just fine.
Right. What do you think about the watering as far as, I mean, and since we don't know where these trees are going to go, what the terrain's going to be, whether it's flat, slant, whatever it might be, how do we develop a program that I can functionally request proposals for that is not, that is somewhat refined, that gives us an apples to apples process? So, I mean, is it, because again, I don't know until we determine where the trees will go, what our terrain is or anything else. But I need to get a proposal ahead of time. I'm not going to go out and pick 1,200 locations and then have a proposal say, here they all are. Go out and visit them all and tell me what your proposal is. I think it's, for me, more functional, especially if developing a budget ahead of time, is assume some assumptions that everything's created equal, that it all balances out, that you'll have some that are on slope, some that are not, some that are flat. Watering wise, what is your opinion as far as the frequency we should be starting with? Again, generally assuming these trees need a certain amount of care, and for how long?
Right. I would say a minimum of weekly watering for 1 year, with the exception of a day when you have an inch of rain or something like that. Anything less than an inch of rain, if it's gone, weeks without rain, that water's just going to run off. A quarter inch, half inch of rain, it's not going to do anything for the tree really, because roots are well down into the soil, right? And the rain is just getting the top and running off. So it needs an inch rain or more. So weekly watering for a year. After that, like Tracy was saying, you can start to reduce the service level at that point. But the first year is critical because you want to establish the tree, get the roots to get into the existing soil, out of its can and into the soil, right? So you do that with the weekly watering. And if, even if maybe you do have a cool temperature week or something like that, and it doesn't need the water, you still want the person to go there, check the tree. Maybe there's some pruning that needs to be done on it. Maybe some sucker growth, perhaps some weeds pull out from around the tree well or something like that. So there's other activities that can be done, adjust the stakes, right, that can be done besides just the watering.
Right. And we haven't had a discussion of this yet for the other panelists, but one of our requirements is that when they plant any new trees, because we've had problems in the past with roots, is to install that tree with a root barrier, because we've had impacts to the road, we've had impacts to the trail, and the question is whether or not that should be a standard requirement in planting in this program because of the impacts we've had to our roads in damaging the roads and the trails. Is the assumption that the trees that we would pick probably wouldn't need a root barrier because they're not as invasive, where we'd focus on that? Or is it just good practice to put them in? I'm just curious from the panelists' view.
Excellent question. There's a lot of debate.
I got one.
There's a lot of debate in the industry about that. I am not a proponent of root barrier. I've seen too many instances where the roots actually grow up and over the barrier and into the existing soil and lift the hardscape anyways. It's extra plastic in the landscape and it doesn't necessarily work all the time. So you really want to plant the right tree in the right place and plant a tree that doesn't have a history of developing large surface roots. That's essentially what your problem is. You want a tree that has oblique growing roots if possible, right? At an angle down to the soil instead of just spreading straight across like a liquid amber on your list and magnolia and a couple others that have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, and that's the problem is some of our areas, or in quite a few areas, you only go a couple feet down and it's granite. And which impacts our ability to plant certain trees, and the roots don't have anywhere to go, but sideways. So
that's just a site problem. That's not a tree problem. Yeah.
We've had a lot of impacts, and again, maybe it's just recognizing you just plant the tree in the right place versus just putting a root barrier everywhere. thoughts, George, on whether you support or like root barriers?
Probably going to agree to root barriers.
Again, this educates us as staff and certainly the commission. Again, root barriers as part of our prior one. We continued it on as part of updating the plan. It's just something that, again, we might look at in the future as a discussion of how to update our plan here, is maybe just simply focus on the right tree and not root barriers, which again, for us makes it less costly for us in our program. So it's
Fail right when you run out of money to do anything about it.
Well, that's a real concern.
So I think what we're going to hear is that the vast majority of us are going to agree on the vast majority of the questions. There are a couple things that I, just in my experience, that I've come up with a couple. The root barrier thing, 100% across the board. Everybody here is going to agree that they don't serve the purpose of what they need to do. If you are planting in a park strip and you're trying to reduce the root growth from going under the street, under sidewalks, under the horse trail, eventually it's going to fail. I have seen them used creatively to bounce a root away from areas, but you need a much larger area for that root system to establish into. It has to have a lot of area to work with. So I think the consensus here is no root barriers. When it comes to the actual palette of the trees, I actually have experience in a program that we did for the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, where we actually worked with residents, and once we started talking about resident pick your tree, what we found is the more choices you give them, they're never happy with what they get. So they always want this other tree that's not available. So I do agree with the larger plant palette, but if you're allowing the resident to make the choice on which tree they want out of that palette, you may have a lot more difficulty with that. The neighbor next door picks one tree, this neighbor picks another tree, this neighbor picks another tree. So yes, we do want to recreate the forest of Norco, but at the same time, do we want to drive down the street and you have 7 different trees in a row? So I do agree with the larger plant palette depending on where these trees are going, but if we are allowing the residents to choose, you may want to limit the tree maybe down to about 5 or 6.
Yeah, because our intent is that if you're willing to put irrigation in, then you can pick the tree you want out of the list we provide.
Yeah.
Other than that, we're going to place trees wherever we feel it's appropriate because we're trying to replant the forest because we've cut so many down. And trying, like you pointed out correctly, what we didn't think about is that you want to mix match your tree, not just 3 or 4, but 10 to 12.
Yeah.
So you get variety and a healthy forest. So our assumption is that we'll get more participation for people who are willing to irrigate it themselves if we let them at least have a choice.
Yes.
But you think that it would probably better on the choice part to limit it to a small amount?
Well,
or
remember,
the same palette, the name 10 or 12?
Us as landscapers, me and George, we look at the aesthetic part of it. So do we want 7 different trees going over and over and over again with no real pattern or anything going down the street? That would be my only concern with it. Now, I do agree with the larger plant palette that just the aesthetics is the only thing that I would be concerned with having a larger plant palette.
Because again, you're talking about 200 people out of 7,500 homes that are spread out all over the place. You're not going to get 5 of them in a row. I mean, that would just be a miracle. If we got 5 people in a row on the same street wanting a tree that they were willing to irrigate, so you'd had, we got the same tree 5 times. So I don't think that's going to happen. But again, I want to have a successful program, and I don't want to make it convoluted. But if it turns out, for efficiency's sake, that we use the same palette of the larger program for the parkways and allow residents to pick, since they're self-irrigating and documented they're going to self-irrigate, to pick their tree. Otherwise, we simply say, we're selecting the tree.
Yeah.
Since we're watering it, we're selecting we're going to put it where we want to place it, and et cetera. But if you're going to water it for us, then we want you to pick the tree that you aesthetically, that's most people will pick. What does it look like? I want this one because it's got the pretty flowers, et cetera.
Exactly.
But in my opinion, as long as it's on the list that you think is a good tree, then whichever tree they choose, big picture is probably not going to be a significant issue because you're talking about 200 people out of 7,500.
I agree.
You're not going to get a bunch in an area and go, oh shoot, we didn't get enough variety.
Or all of a sudden, all 7,500 want them.
Yeah. So again, but I like that information. It's important. I'm just trying to gauge whether I should have a smaller palette for these people or a bigger palette. I'm hoping again, keeping it simple, is just use the same palette we ultimately select of 10 or 12, and it's good enough.
And then the last thing is, like we said, we're all pretty much on the same board when it comes to watering. You know, the first 6 months of the year is the critical time to make sure that the root system establishes properly. We get a nice healthy root system. Try not to plant right before the windy season, because then we're just shaking it back and forth, and it's going to break any of that new root system that has developed. One thing that I haven't heard mentioned though are a contraption, or there are these things called gator bags. And it's actually a bag that you put around the tree, and it leaches water into the soil. It can provide a longer lasting water, as opposed to giving the real deep root system, the real deep soaking all at one time and then allowing it to dry up. We do have a little bit of a sandy soil here, so some of that's going to want to run off on us. So if we release it slowly and try to keep it wet, as opposed to just dropping all the water in there and then letting it run away, it might work out a little bit better.
Is this a one-time device, or is it when you plant it, or is it every time you water?
Think about a trash bag wrapped around the tree, and you fill the trash bag with water.
Each time you water?
Each time you water.
Oh, so it can refill. It's not the first time, it's every time.
It's a pretty, like a tarp type material, and then it has just leach holes in the bottom that slowly releases some of that water for you. What do you experience with gator bags?
I like the permit.
Yeah, they can get torn up by rodents and things like that from time to time, but really that's what I've seen is most around. So you have your tree, right? And then it's a bag, like I said, like a trash bag that sits around the trunk of the tree, and it just kind of rests there. So it circles the tree. Then you fill that bag with water. The water isn't on the trunk of the tree. It's not soaking the trunk of the tree. It's got a layer in between it. It keeps the water from getting onto the tree. And then at the bottom of it, it has a different type of material that allows the water to leach into the soil. So ideally what you would be able to do is, as opposed to having to go back and refill that bag over and over and over again throughout the week, instead of doing 3 waterings a week, you might be able to get it down to 2 or 1 depending on the weather. So a little bit more efficiency.
Obviously, the summertime you might do it twice, wintertime maybe once.
May not even do it.
Maybe not even
Yeah,
do
maybe hit it once and you're there for back in 2 weeks.
How long do they typically last?
They're pretty,
generally?
as long as, like I said, you get some rodent issues. One thing we see is if they're planted in turf, the gardeners will hit them with the weed eater. But other than that, they're pretty
Don't
hardy.
got grass here, do we?
Yeah. They're pretty hardy. They're pretty strong. They're pretty tough. They don't get a lot of problems.
Right.
So.
Okay.
People do not understand.
Tim, do you have experience with gator bags?
Not to use them if possible. We know cities, like it's just an extra cost on the project. If the tree is water well with the hose, why spend the extra money to buy bags? There is the vandalism. Buy another one. Better trees normally.
Gotcha.
Without it successfully, so.
George, any thoughts?
Watering system that the most used.
Patrick?
I think I've seen them used it where you weren't going to be able to get back, check on it, but in a situation like this where somebody can go and see, check the condition, I think it's an added cost that maybe isn't.
Thank you. Yeah. So, as you can see, there's certainly varying opinions. And like I said, my thoughts on this, which was a complete uneducated one as far as how we would do it, certainly has been blown up. And certainly we need the recommendation from our experts is we need a larger plant palette. And there's certainly a question about how long we need to water and how often that we need to consolidate. I know, certainly if they had all the information of where it was going to be, the type of soil, the slope, etc., our experts could give us more refined opinions. But for us, we're not going to know that. We're going to establish a program where our assumption is everything's flat, there's no water there. How would we maintain these trees? And it sounds like I have more homework to do to get more information to the commission to chew on. But, with what I indicated before is what I'll probably do is reach out to this panel again to get some specific information, including their tree palette that they'd recommend, including any trees that they recommend that we not have on our list. But again, if they're giving me their tree palette, and if it's not on the list, just indicating that it's not on our current list, but they want to look at it, especially if it comes to any natives or whatnot. That way I can kind of give you a consolidated list of the potential trees, and I'll certainly provide that same information to all the panelists of what was provided. So hopefully the next time we would meet on this topic, we can kind of come to a consensus of the trees. And if not, what I would probably end up doing is, as staff level, to not put the burden on yourselves to come up and decide which trees, is I would probably just select the group of trees based off the list and try to basically create a list that I think is reasonable off of what information they provide to me, to consolidate that. And then ultimately probably come to you with at least a minimum plan for watering, basically pointing out that at least it's going to be maybe twice a week, potentially. I know we've heard 3 times a week, and that might be something we have to clarify with the ultimate contract that we hire, that we may end up developing a plan where we water more frequently in the summer and less frequently in the winter, which obviously makes sense. The question is how I create a meaningful RFP to get an apples and apples proposal, or at least something that we can accept to bring back to this commission and council to say, hey, here's how we want to run our program. I do want to certainly give you the opportunity, since you're here, obviously, and you're the commission, to ask any questions you want of the panelists. So we give additional information. I just wanted them to give some base information as a discussion for you. So I do encourage the commission to, if you have any individual questions now for the commission that you'd like to have answered about the program, that we ask those questions now.
I just wanted to make one statement. That when we initially put this list together, one of the driving forces behind it was because we have such a large animal community, that we were trying to pick the species that weren't irritant or dermatitis to certain animals and to ourselves, obviously, because we're going to make contact with them. We ride under them, under the canopies, and the horses have a tendency to grab a snack once in a while, like a salad bar. So that was one of the driving forces behind it. So I just appreciate if you would keep that thought in mind when you come together with the list. But personally, I want to thank you for all coming, and it was very interesting and informative, and I enjoyed it.
Gary?
Oh, okay. I'd appreciate it if you all could keep in mind that, we're a city of horse trails. So you have horse trail on one side of the street and no horse trail on the other side of the street. So those parkways, if we're lucky, the lawn would come just about all the way up to the parkway. So that tree might be looking at a little more moisture if somebody's watering, and the root problem would only impact, we don't want to lift the street, but on the trail side, the canopy. The residents are required to take care of the horse trail, and they're also required to keep the tree trimmed 8 feet? 8 feet. Yeah, and they don't like doing it, but that's the part about being on horseback. We don't want the weeping willow on the parkway on the horse trail side of the fence, and we don't want a tree that's going to have that root running across the horse trail for the water in that lawn, where it comes up and create a situation where the horse might trip on it. And if some of these trees would do that, I'd appreciate it if you let us know. Yeah, because tree's not going to be impacted so much on the non-horse trail side. So thank you for your info.
I appreciated Tracy pointing out some of the trees that could cause problems with insects and ticks and different bugs that we don't need around here. And so I appreciated hearing that. What's going through my mind, of course, is looking at the grant that's available to us and looking at maintenance. Obviously, the water is a huge, big deal. And, you know, if it comes down to a water truck, you know, that's probably something, if you can't get it contracted, the city's going to end up having to step up to do that. And what's that cost going to be? Is it effective? So on and so forth. I had never heard of those gator bags before until they were brought up, and I just looking real quickly, those are $10 to $12 a piece. That's a lot of money for that many trees. So, you know, it sounds like it would work, but we got to look at the whole thing. What I was thinking was it might be helpful to us if there were 10 or 12 of these trees each that each one of you chose that you thought would be a reasonable pallet, and we'll see where they cross. Who thinks that these are going to be, you know, a reasonable tree for us to plant and to take a look at? So that was something that crossed my mind that way.
Yeah, and that's what I indicated earlier I would do, is I would get the palette that they would recommend individually, and then I would put that list together and find out where they cross and where they don't. And again, we'll have another meeting to discuss that. And again, I want to consolidate everything so it's easier to review.
Sure. I appreciate everybody being here. It's very helpful and a lot of knowledge. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming and appreciate your information to us. I've lived here 43 years, and I think this is a great opportunity for the city to move ahead and with the trees. Keep in mind that we have a wind issue here, and of course the root system was brought up about the street issues and trails. Height of the tree, I don't know if that is a consideration for parkway trails, or
It will be only in SE under wire.
under wires. If we want an evergreen tree or deciduous tree, if that's going to be an issue with keeping the parkway clean or the streets clean. And whether the tree is a single trunk or multiple trunk, is that going to be an issue with a parkway tree? But I'm really excited about this, and I'm glad Chad's been able to carry this through. I think the planning of at the certain time of the year, if we do it in the winter, maybe that would be the best, where we get past the winds in September and October, if that's possible. Or maybe put your comments in when these trees should be planted, so we get the best response or success out of this effort.
And just for the commission and the panelists, this most likely would not start any planting for at least 6 months. There's a lot of work for me to do before I get this off the ground. So you're probably looking into the new year before we get anywhere to start planting. And certainly when we engage a contractor, we would take their advice about when we should start that. So even on the contract, if we started it, and if it was January and they said, it's really not a good time to plant, it's winter time, I'd rather start in March, then we would start in March. I mean, again, we're going to take their advice as the experts of when to do it. So we're at least, the last thing we want to do is start something that's on the wrong foot.
Right. I appreciate all this information that we've been given. Thank you.
It's been great. I appreciate the panelists' participation and willingness to come here. Again, I wanted to put a face to the organization and the community members that are interested in this process, and I appreciate the panelists coming and giving their expertise. I do want to put out the offer to Tracy that, again, if you want to go through by detail of this and give us your expert opinion about some of the areas that we might want to change on here, I'd welcome you writing that up and providing that to staff, and we can sit down and review it independently. Because again, we've always told our commission that this is not a static item. It can move and change as we get more information. And again, we changed this on our own, just trying to streamline it, eliminate some of the redundancy in some of the trees that we knew we didn't like because they cause us maintenance issues or is a health problem for horses. So we did not get into the detail whether or not the recommended practices in here are current and are recommended anymore. So any feedback you want to give, which I'll certainly forward to our commission and have a discussion, I'm very welcome and would encourage you to provide that. And that goes to any of the commission if you have that kind of time. But I know Tracy had presented some interest in wanting to discuss some of the other items here more, but I had to unfortunately disappoint her. That might be a later date. But I'm happy to tear this thing apart and make something you think is better for the city. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pollard.
Any more questions to the guest tonight? So we're going to number 4. The commission submits staff communications. Huh?
3B.
Oh, 3B. Okay, on 3B, the starting time or discussion for public's work.
Sure. Thank you. The item B was a request from Commissioner Williams to bring back the discussion related to the current start time. Back in February, we had a meeting where we discussed the moving the start time to an earlier time to accommodate staff to not have a later meeting, so we could start right after work stops and not have a gap where it starts at 7. It's better for staff, its functionality as far as to be able to come to the meeting and then leave again and not have that hour gap in between. So at this point, it's a discussion for the commission on especially for Mr. Williams, since he asked us to re-agendize this as a discussion, and the commission agreed to do that. And I'd welcome discussion from Mr. Williams at this point, or however the chair would like to begin the discussion.
Yeah, I think Mike, go ahead. You want to reinstate?
Thank you. My concern is making these meetings available to the residents of the city. Quite honestly, when I volunteered for this, I knew that this wasn't about me, and it wasn't about anybody else in here. It was about the residents, and that's why these commissions are in place. It's my understanding from what I read that we are more or less liaisons between the residents and the council, and we make recommendation to the council together. And I feel very strongly that we need to give residents the opportunity to get here. 7 o'clock seems like a more reasonable time to me. Other commissions, planning commission 7 o'clock, council's at 7 o'clock. I think Parks and Rec is currently at 6:30 p.m. So I thought 7 o'clock was a more reasonable time. Yeah, I like to get home early too, and I understand, I do. But, you know, we have to go back and consider the reason we're here and what we represent as commission members. So that's my feeling at this point.
Sure. Just for clarification, so the commissioners are all aware. So EDAC is done during the day. Historic Preservation Commission is done at 4 o'clock. Park is at 6:30. The Measure R Commission is at 6 o'clock. But the only two that are at 7 o'clock are planning and council, which are decision-making bodies. The others are recommendation bodies that ultimately go to either planning commission or council. We have not had a history of participation in this commission at 7 o'clock in the 5 years I've been here. It's usually the people that do participate are the same ones. Usually you get Bill Naylor or Bonnie Slager here, pretty much conditionally. They're loyal. They're always here, so I appreciate it. I'm sure they're watching. But we don't get a lot of participation in this commission at 7 o'clock, never have. So I felt the request was reasonable and warranted to come at 6. I haven't had any complaints that it's been moved to 6. I would recommend the commission keep it at 6, and if we get complaints or issues from the public that somehow they're not being able to participate, then in a meaningful number that we can always adjust and change the timing. Our only obligation of this commission is to have it on the first Monday of every other month. That we're obligated because of the city ordinance. The time of when we hold the meeting is entirely up to the commission. We could do it in the middle of the day, we could have it in the morning, we could have it at night. It's entirely this commission, and you have it under your ability to change the time when you want to. But I just want to at least make you aware of all the different commissions and what they do. And it's kind of all over the board of where they go. And it's really up to you. I said for staff, our appreciation and preference is to start at 6 because, again, our workday stops at 6 and then we start this commission. And then, again, Shannon's workday stops, who's paid hourly. She goes at it. I'm salaried, so it doesn't matter. I'm here till whenever we're done, But for others, staff, they're either they live far away or they're that. So for us, for me, my request is simply a consideration for staff, and the fact that we don't get public. There's not been an issue of people saying I didn't get here in time. One of our newest commissions, which is the COC for Measure R, it gets people to those meetings, and there's people there on a routine basis participating or listening, and that's at 6 o'clock. So, and I haven't heard an issue of people not being able to attend. So, I get and fully respect the idea of wanting to make yourselves available for the public to participate. However, in this particular case, we don't have participants that never have really at 7 o'clock. And I haven't heard any issues with the fact that it's now at 6 from the public in any shape or form, other than till Commissioner Williams wanted to have the discussion. So again, I absolutely respect Mr. Williams' request and desires to advocate for the public, but I'm not hearing that message and haven't heard that message for the last 5 years since I've been here. So that's my only 2 cents in asking that we keep it at 6, but I'm happy to do whatever the commission wants to do.
I'm retired. I really didn't have a issue. In 5 years, besides Bill and Bonnie, the same thing, just like you say, they're like clockwork. 2 hot button issues in the last 5 years, the mountain bike race, and putting a trail on the street over there for where they have the backyard trail. It's the only time anybody's ever came other than Bill and Bonnie. So, now we have one email, and that's what I looked at. If it was easier for staff, that's not a problem for me. So, until we get a hot button topic, nobody comes. That's it.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Chad. If, it's, with the turnout we get, it really isn't affecting the public. And, we should think about the accommodations for the people that are here that we support. So I'm good with where it's at 6.
Sherry?
I'm good with 6 o'clock for all the above reasons.
How about Shannon? How's she? She has a family life too, I know.
If anybody's still working and it's interfering, but like I said, I'm retired.
Mike? Mike, do you have a comment on the 6 o'clock? Are you tight on 7? The public input is the thing that I'm concerned with too, but
Yeah.
the time I've been here, we really haven't had anybody that has pushed the 7 o'clock issue or the 6 o'clock issue.
I noticed in our packets that there was some comment on this, public comment.
Yeah, it's in your packet.
Okay. Everybody have a chance to read that, or do you want to read it out loud, or how do you want to do this one?
Yeah. We changed it on our own, for our own needs. I think we changed it to accommodate staff in regards to this letter.
That
The way
was,
I took it.
yeah, that was our intent.
And if we had a lot of community support, I'd probably feel different about it. I worked in Long Beach. Murder to make it back.
I don't have anything else, Mr. Commissioner, so.
Okay, can we take a vote on this?
I'll make a motion that we leave it at 6 o'clock.
I'll second the motion.
So we have a motion and a second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Chair Pollard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Williams,
No.
Commission Members Schoen,
Yes.
Thompson, Walker,
Yes.
motion passes.
And just again, to clarify, this can be changed at any time if we feel that we want to change this to some other time, whether it's 6:30, 7, 8 o'clock, whatever. It just, again, it's at the pleasure of the commission. If we're now actively involved in activities or things and we need people to come, we can always make special meetings where we start it at a later time to facilitate discussion. So if we have a high profile project that we're looking to do, so we can customize it, but it's entirely up to you. So this is not a static thing we're stuck with.
Can you do that on the agenda before, or would we have to have a meeting and then?
We can always adjust a time if we need to because of a delay or an issue.
There's a big hot, yeah.
Yeah, again, for example, if we do a special meeting, I can make it at a different time because of the special meeting. And it's has to be about a specific topic that we're trying to deal with. A regular scheduled meeting, again, should normally be at the time that we have it scheduled. But again, we can vote to change it at any time if it becomes an issue. Like I said, I'm not hard and fast on it. I appreciate the support on it. I appreciate Mike understanding our reasons. I respect him not wanting to keep it or move it back to 7. But be assured, this doesn't lock anything in stone forever. We can always have this discussion again and again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe Shannon can answer this question. I talked to you earlier that on the city website, it showed our meeting at 7. Was that noted? And
Yes.
thank you.
You're welcome.
A question to Chad. Is there any talk or possibility that our meetings go back to monthly at some point?
Not at this time, because there's not, to be honest, a lack of items to meet on. We had a good run there every meeting for about a year and a half ago where we had topics. So we accomplished a lot, and now it's kind of gone down as far as the active issues. Like I said, we took care of the tree palette plan. We looked at other issues, then we updated certain ordinances and got those resolved. So we took care of a lot of the high-level issues that we were looking to take care of. So now, and this is the latest one, which is the tree program. How do we get this off and running? And it may be that we might meet monthly, even though it's special meetings in between, to get this program off the ground. Because again, I want to get this thing moving and move forward. So I really can't afford to wait every other month. So we may have some special meetings about this one topic, but I don't have any specific upcoming items that I need to be resolved on a monthly basis.
Okay, thank you.
I've got one question, Mr. Commissioner, if I could, for you, Chad. You would know this. On this grant that we got from CAL FIRE, is there a deadline on that, or have they?
It's a 3-year window to complete all the work.
Okay.
And as I indicated previously, we're about a year in.
Okay, so we've still got
We've
two
still got
years
2 years,
roughly.
which shouldn't be any problem to get the trees planted and start. And if this case we water them, we just get that maintenance period started. So my goal is to get it as quickly as possible, with hopefully getting somebody under contract and started in the first part of next year. So I have at least a year and a half to work it within the time period, with the assumption is that we'd asked for it to be certified probably the first 6 months, saying we're done and everything's been finished. But again, it's a plan that we've just started as far as developing this plan. I still have to work with parks and figure out how many trees they want, where they're going to be, and get them. So the more trees they can put in, that shortens our list how to do the citywide trees. But again, they can only put so much in a park. Yeah, it's a 3-year program. We're about a year in already.
Got it. I apologize, you mentioned that earlier.
No, it's fine.
And I did hear it, so I just didn't gray.
You're on item 4, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, item 4, Commission Subcommittee Staff Communications. Gary, do you have anything?
I had a quick question.
Oh, sure.
I just happened to be driving around in Reservoir. I think was the street I was on, coming up to 3rd.
Okay.
And we had vinyl fencing on Reservoir, and one resident has the old wooden trail fence still up that is completely engulfed in beautiful rose bushes.
On Reservoir?
Yeah.
On the trail side?
Yeah. I was wondering if, just one, and I mean, you can't even hardly see the trail fence. It looks fine. I'm like, you got it?
Is it wooden fencing?
Yeah. I just wondered if
Because
you
we
intended
replaced half of that. You're talking about between Reservoir and Willow?
I'm trying to look at the map here. Just before you hit, see, you're on Reservoir. Yeah, that is Willow.
So between Willow and 3rd on Reservoir, you're talking about? Okay. Because half of that trail fencing,
Third.
you're on 3rd.
Reservoir comes up to 3rd Street. If you're going south, you past the coach. Yeah, past Parmenter Park, coming south. They're just, and it looks fine. I'm not complaining.
Because I don't think we replaced any trail fencing. It's older project. Yeah, that's not one of our, at least one of the projects we've done since I've been here.
Okay, that would.
So, but yeah, it doesn't make sense why there'd be one section that doesn't have white vinyl fencing.
Well, it's pretty. I just wonder if he's going to go back to get it.
Yeah, we'll have Derek take a look at it.
Don't I don't want to make the resident mad tearing the rose bushes down.
Commissioner Thompson said that your rose bushes had to be torn out
I just was
and a
wondering.
new white vinyl fence put in. So
Yeah,
we'll give them your name and number.
they're
But
watching.
we'll take a look at it, because again, in theory, if it was a project that replaced all the white fencing versus a private residential work that maybe put in fencing, which I have to determine. But I know in my 5 years, we haven't done any work there
Okay, yeah.
for a project we've done.
And 6th Street looks really nice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah. We've unfortunately had it already hit 3 different times on the inner fencing. That's what I thought was going to be the biggest problem is, unfortunately, a lot of it's too close to the parking lots, and they're backing into it. So they're already smashing out end posts and damaging the fencing. So it's going to be a long-term problem of maintenance for my staff, because they're going to probably end up having to be the ones to fix it on an individual basis, because the cost for me to hire a contractor to go out there and do a onesie-twosie post is going to be way more expensive than us just doing it ourselves.
Bollards.
You mean like this?
I wish we could, but remember, we put the fencing at the property line. So we have nowhere to place the bollards except for on private property, and they're not going to let us put,
You mean like
infrastructure.
you mean like at the 7-Eleven?
Yeah.
It just might be, twice now.
Yeah.
I saw that the other day and I thought, that's a target.
Yeah, in front of the liquor store at Valley View, that got hit twice.
Gee whiz.
So fortunately, we haven't accepted the project, so the contractor's going to have to fix them. But you can see very quickly, we're going to be doing a lot of maintenance on that. So it was one of
Place those with steel.
On a-
They look just like vinyl.
yeah.
Paint them white. That'd look good. Yeah.
Yeah, but white vinyl, it'll still break. It'll damage the car more, but it'll still break, and we'll end up having to replace it still. So believe me, I thought about those ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
case.
They'll think about it before they hit it again.
Yeah. So, but no, the project it does look very good, and the contractor did a very good job in getting everything done. It looks nice and neat, especially since the contractor for the trail maintenance went through and graded the trail first, and then they brought it, so everything looks nice and clean. That's what we wanted to do. So, but unfortunately, it's already getting damaged, and that's just going to be the nature of what I'm going to have to budget every year. Is probably quite a bit of trail fencing that's going to have to be fixed on the inner side. So far, I've only seen on the inner because it's the closest to the parking lots. So we'll see what happens. But it does look nice.
Yeah, maybe.
Outer, it'll be big.
Yeah, it's usually the car ran through it. Accidents, but we'll see.
2 for 1.
You drive down there at 35 and get run over.
Oh, yeah.
Sherry, did you have anything?
I did on the street sweeping. We talked about the schedule, but I don't remember. Was it quarterly?
So in the residential, it's quarterly.
Okay.
And on 6th Street and Hamner, it's monthly.
Okay. Thank you.
Gary, nothing?
Mr. Commissioner, I got a couple other things here, if I could, real quick. I had a call. Center Street between 6th and 7th. Resident called me about around the manhole covers, about the 4,000 block, and evidently they're starting to sink a little bit around the outer ring of the manhole, the base, and I guess somebody came in and they threw some, I would call it like cold asphalt. I don't know how you do that.
Cold
but there's
patch.
big old, yeah, there's just big patches of it in there, lumpy and this and that and the other thing, and maybe somebody could take a look at it and make it a little bit more reasonable until until that street gets done, whenever that is. I don't know.
It's another one for you, Derek.
The flashing speed limit signs, they're not all hooked up yet, is that right? Not all of them that are set? Or
They're all set up. Yep.
I happened to be over on Norco Hills Drive the other day, just south of Longhorn. There's one there, and it wasn't in op over the weekend. Interactive speed. So maybe it looked like to me the solar panel was down and it was kind of turned around a little bit. I don't know if that has anything to do with it.
I drove it on Saturday and it was working.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I drove it Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm commonly looking at it. I know the one that's the sign that is not speed sign, but stop sign that's supposed to be flashing that's at Norco Hills Road and Valley is not working because where it was placed which is, again, is after the fact thought, it was pretty much put behind a masonry wall, so you can't even see it, and it's not getting sunlight. So there's a couple stop signs. I think actually just one stop sign that's going to be relocated to someplace else. That's the one that's going to be relocated. And there's several speed signs that are going to be relocated to better areas, because we've had them in for a while, and the data in some of the areas simply says there's no issue there. So we're going to move them to a different location where we have more of a potential speeding problem. For example, the ones we put on Corridon between 5th and Bluff, the data is just very low as far as speeding, and it doesn't make any sense to put them there. We have others that are in the right location on the street but need to be relocated to a better area to capture more traffic. For example, the ones on 5th that are in front of the prison, they're more offset. We're now looking to move them to the center median so they get a better line of sight and the residents see them better. The one closest to the prison, Norconian, towards Corridon, it needs to be moved more to the east, so because it's really too close to Corridon, so people don't get enough speed. They come over the hill and they haven't caught their speed yet. We want to move it down farther so that when they start their raceway, they're really flashing at them saying, hey, slow down. So there's several that we've identified we need to relocate, either on the same street, just a better area, or just need to be moved entirely because it's just, there's not a traffic issue based off the data. We're seeing very little speeding. And so everything's been installed, everything is functioning, except for that one stop sign that we have to relocate that's basically just dead because there's no sun. And unfortunately for us, we're partly to blame, or we are to blame for some of these and where they're placed, in that we originally gave the contractor just a general map of where we wanted these infrastructures to go. What we should have done is gone out to each location and marked where they should have gone. And if we had done that appropriately, we would have seen that the location, we would have picked where we wanted to be. They ultimately picked where they thought the dot was, and they didn't bother to say, hey, this seems to be right behind a tree, or this is under this. There wasn't any communication, unfortunately, until after the fact. So, but we had to take the blame for that as we gave them some information. So we're going to be moving several of them just so that they're in a better spot. And we've learned our lessons such that if we go to phase 2 on this project, which is adding more, again, as we talked about, we originally wanted double the amount of these signs and speed signs. That the council elected to do is let's install half of them, wait a year, see how they work, what kind of feedback we get from the public, whether they hate them, they like them, what kind of data we're getting, what's it showing, to where we may go out and do another phase. So next fiscal year, we may be having that discussion again where we're going to recommend to council, hey, it seems to be working pretty good. There's a lot of requests. I'm already getting requests to, hey, put that speed sign near my house. But so there might be a future phase. So we're learning our lessons on this first phase at least, whether there's a second phase or not, but we will certainly implement it more effectively in how we tell the contractor to go out and put them in the right place. But staff's going to do all that relocation on our own. We're not hiring a contractor to relocate them. That's on us. But again, everything is in. It's functioning, except for that one sign. We're getting data back on every radar sign. I plan to bring that back to you at some point. Was getting the on-site website refined and cleaned up so it met our needs to bring back to you to show you as a demonstration. Here's the feedback signs, here's the software, here's the data we get, here's how we can easily filter out and get the counts of how many vehicles on any day, how many were speeding, etc., how it works, how we can adjust things, etc. So I want to bring that back to you as a demonstration. Plan to do the same thing to the Measure R Commission and then eventually the council, so everybody sees what we did functionally, that we have this data, this infrastructure out there, and it does give us data, at least some information that and then we're sharing that information with the Sheriff's Department so they can decide of, hey, what areas do we want to go to that seem to be high speeders, and they go out there and remind people that this is an area and give them some tickets for a while, and then they'll move on to other areas, and then speeds will go back up again, and they keep going. But at least they have physical data that tells them where's the hot spot this week or this day, and they have access to that information. So I think so far it's been a very positive program.
I got one more thing. 4th Street, 5th Street in Detroit were the bridges with trails go over Interstate 15. At each end of the divider rail, next to the trail, there's a guardrail that extends from either end. It's got some wood on top of it, and some of that wood looks like it's been there since they were put in. There's a chance we could get a look at that, take a look at it. They're ready to be replaced, a lot of that wood. It's just old and worn out, starting to roll up. It's just old wood.
Talking about wood on the guardrail?
It's on the top of the guardrail. It looks like maybe it was implemented as a safety issue or something.
On the top of the K rail?
It's on the, not on the K rail, but there's a metal regular guardrail at the end of each one of those bridges on the trail side.
On the street side or the inside?
It's on the street side, next to the street.
Okay.
And then you've got your divider, and then you got your trail between the.
Because if it's a physical thing that's part of the overpass, that's a.
Is that a Caltrans?
That's a Caltrans issue. We don't maintain that.
Yeah, they're at the ends.
Yeah, but again,
I don't know if
Caltrans'
that's
right
city
away
or-
goes way beyond the end.
Right.
So there's and again, we have a maintenance obligation for all the overpasses when it comes to either repaving and or weed abatement. But when it comes to the physical structure of the overpass, that's something we would defer back to Caltrans. So if there's an issue with K-rail or any type of guardrail or any type of compression device where you can run into them physically and that kind of thing, those are always deferred to Caltrans to repair. So you're saying that some of them are just look deteriorated?
Very much deteriorated. The wood on the top, the rails look fine, but just on the top, that cap was placed on there.
Derek, if you
maybe
could just,
safe.
yeah, if you could just take me a picture and let me understand what it is, and then we'll see what we need to do.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That was, if I remember right, that was done so you didn't fall, or the horse didn't fall on to the edge of that.
It looks like that. Yeah, you're probably right.
All memory there. They didn't do much for Norco because Norco fought them. I don't think. Not well yet, do we?
Oh, we do. Yeah. In fact, on that note, we have been provided both permits for the widening at 2nd Street at Hamner to the I-15 and the 6th Street to the I-15. So finally, after multiple years, they've given me the permits to widen 6th Street and 2nd Street between Hamner and the I-15. So we have a dedicated turn lane onto southbound I-15. So that'll help with the flow of traffic at both those locations. So, yeah, we're good now. I mean, we're building on the relationship.
Coordinate the traffic signals?
Let's not get crazy. Okay,
Big reach.
It's one miracle at a time. But that is an ultimate goal. Yes.
Eventually, those guys got to retire that were all involved in that freeway in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Get about all that hate and discontent.
Jim, I know you had a couple questions for me. We were deferring to the end.
Well, yeah, I do. Well, what we talked about before, fire hydrant exercising, are we doing anything for the hydrants?
Yeah, we do it every year.
All of them?
All of them. Every
I'm not
way
sure.
our program works is that we have a contractor do half the city every year. So
Okay.
Right now they're starting on the east side, I believe, right? East side of the city. Last year they did the west side.
Okay. That one done. I have issues with Edison. The street light on Saratoga, the cul-de-sac, Saratoga Circle, has been out since March. Edison's been notified. I've talked about it here at the Street and Tails Committee last 2 months, and it's still out as we talk tonight. They say it's the COVID thing, but this is a safety issue since March, and these people are coming to me like, well, why can't we get this fixed? Is there an answer?
Edison's choice of when they were going to fix it. I put in a request to have a cable that was broken down from a pole, so it was a sport cable that was down. It was snapped off on Sierra. It's still not fixed, and that's been 5 months. And like I said, every time we refer to them, we say, hey, this is a safety issue. It's right on our trail. People get their head snagged on it. It's their timeline. Unfortunately, and unfortunately, COVID has impacted a lot of these industries where they're only going out to do immediate emergency issues. But we'll keep on it. Like I said, the request, like you said, the request is in. It's there. It's just a matter of them going out and doing it.
Are they picking on us because we have a new energy source other than Edison? Okay, I didn't say that.
I don't know. They're not supposed to be.
Okay, how about, do we have any information on the exit from Silver Lakes that the Eastville wanted to, that we talked about having an exit to the left coming out of Silver Lakes?
No, there's no update on it. It's a project that the council approved to go be designed for consideration, and that's currently being worked on as far as to look, is it physically viable to put an intersection there in, and that process has just started. So all they're doing is an assessment initially to find out, is it viable, because it's close to an existing intersection now, and part of that will include, because again, it wasn't Eastville who wanted it, it was the council for Norco who wanted it.
Correct.
So part of that will be discussing it with Eastvale, because half of the signal will be in Eastvale. That will have to get their permission to do it, because the way the northerly entrance lines up versus the city boundaries is it basically goes at an angle, but your intersection is going to go straight across the road, but the boundaries go at an angle, and so therefore part of the signal will be in the city of Eastville, so we get their permission and their buy-off on doing it, which again, they may or may not do. I don't see why they would fight us against us if we wanted to, but there's logistics in there. We want to make sure we coordinate with, we put a signal in, we need to coordinate it with their signal at Sliceman, and potentially coordinate it with the signal at Citrus, so we get proper flow. Again, we're really only talking about weekends.
Right.
So that's really, during the week, it's a non-issue. It'll be green the whole time. But it's when they have an event on a Saturday, and it's a big concert, that's the only time it's really needed to allow left-hand movement onto Hamner. So our engineers are working on that design. They're eventually at some point going to be sitting down. We'll all sit down and talk with Eastville about that design and why we want it, and what issues they may have with the design, or what considerations they want in order to put it in. But right now we're just in the beginning phase of designing it.
I personally think that they got to do something, because we're disenfranchised with that whole situation that they got going there. I've gone to several events at Silver Lakes. When you go to leave, they force you to go to that far exit and to go north, and will not permit you to travel to Norco. And it's aggravating.
But you can make a U-turn at Schleichman. That's
right,
that's one of the things that we actually installed because it didn't exist before.
That creates a big headache of people
it
trying
was,
to
again,
flip a U-turn.
It's mainly at the time not having a signal. The best alternative was to create a long pocket so people can make a U-turn.
I don't understand, though, why they don't allow traffic to exit at Citrus right there so they can come out and turn left.
Oh, as far as operationally?
Yeah.
It depends on where you're at, where you're parked at. If you're parked in the back parking lot, they're going to make you go the northerly exit. If you're parked in the parking lots towards the front, you get to go out the main
Last
exit.
event I went to,
they just simply divert people.
Anybody out over there, they were making everybody go north.
Yeah, like I said, and there's been constant complaints during events that's how they do it, and they're not maximizing how they do it. I've been at times where they're forcing me out the main entrance, even though I'm in the back parking lot, and there's nobody going on the northerly entrance. I'd gladly go that direction, but they're not. They're making me go this way. So believe me, in general, there's been plenty of complaints about the direction or lack of the parking process that they have at times in exiting vehicles. So it definitely can be improved, in our opinion. We've expressed that to them in our follow-up meetings with some of their events. But again, right now what the council wants is to look at what's the viability of doing a traffic signal there, which unfortunately doesn't help you at all, as far as if they're forcing me out the northerly entrance, not let me go out the middle, it doesn't help. But they are looking at it.
Okay, one other thing. Chad, I appreciate everything you've done for this new fencing that we put into place here in Norco. Do you have a start date for this year's vinyl fencing at the locations we talked about?
No, not at this point. We have gone through, as part of the process, determined the likely linear footage on all the streets that we reviewed. And since that time, also, I think I may have told you, but the last meeting we had in our minutes, it talked about we were looking for funding of $250,000. Well, the city manager recommended we actually ask for $500,000.
Yes.
So, which we have done that with the Streets Trails Utilities Commission, and they've supported it. So now we're going to take that back to City Council, which I expect them to support that. So with the $500,000 and the numbers that I've determined, including removals, because at this time, since we don't have any of the court crews or CAL FIRE crews, and we're not expected to have them anytime soon, I'm going to be bidding for removal of the fencing and then installation as part of the work. I've determined that we can actually do every single street, removals and new, that we had on our list, and get them all done for this year. So it's a huge amount of fencing.
That's great.
That we'll be able to do. So there won't be any street that we have at this point identified that we're not going to have done. But I don't have a start date because I'm still working out the details of developing my bid document, which since we now know the linear footages, et cetera, I can put my bid document, create my maps so the contractors know where all these locations are, et cetera. So that'll probably go out in the next month or so eventually. Again, my goal is to probably by November, maybe early October, we have something that goes to council to award, which is more than enough time for a contractor to go through and by the end of June to do all the fencing. But it's by far the biggest chunk of funding we've had to do trail fencing, I think, for at any time for us. So it's great.
Yeah.
One more question. You brought up Silver Lakes, and I had thought that, would they be a recipient for some of the trees?
No.
Okay.
Well, in retrospect, I would say because it's a city-owned facility, even though it's being used for private use, there's a possibility that we could plant trees there. But to be candid, I don't think Silver Lakes would want them there because it's more maintenance costs for them. More watering, it's more tree trimming, et cetera. So we would certainly get feedback from Silver Lakes, but I would rather see those trees in the community than at Silver Lakes.
Right.
Nothing's for free.
Well, I just thought if we get in a bind and we have 400 more trees left over, 200 more.
Yeah, but that's a different discussion in that we can't force something on them that now creates a larger maintenance obligation without an agreement.
Right.
But it is. I think your idea is correct in that it's a city facility. It is public, in that the public can go there, but it's not a park where you can freely do what you want and come as you go and just throw down and have a picnic, when you want to. So, but again, I would rather focus on putting those trees in the city, physically in the areas that we live in versus the offshoot over at Silver Lakes. But it is potentially an option. You're right.
Is there a way we could get a mailer out to the residents where they could apply for these actual?
We've already done that, and that was our survey initially. Doesn't mean we won't do it again once we get our program refined, but we've already sent out and did a survey with the residents, and including a mailer in the bill to tell them, hey, here's a survey, go on the website and fill it out. But again, that was our initial survey to give us a feel for how many people might be interested in the program. Unfortunately, it was low. We didn't have any more details for them to really get them more involved of which trees to choose from or how many. We basically said everybody gets at least one tree. Are you interested? Are you willing to water? But we will most likely, once the program is refined and defined, we'll probably re-engage that survey one more time to see if there's anybody else interested.
Possibly the issue that they had to provide water, maybe. I mean, it makes common sense, but maybe that was some of the reasons why people didn't respond.
Well, the reality is if it's a program where the city is obligated to water, we're just going to pick the locations for the trees. If a resident wants a tree and they're willing to water it, we'll probably let them pick a tree out of the pallet so that they can at least have the tree they would like to see there since they're willing to take care of it. Otherwise, we'll put them where we think we need them in a lot of the areas where we already removed trees. And we'll focus on those areas. Otherwise, it's not going to be, you want a tree, that's great, but then we'll see what we can do. But I'm going to look at, first and foremost, all the locations I know where I removed trees and pick those places first, and then go to the folks that maybe want a tree that didn't have one before. So we want to go back, because we've told residents, look, if and when we ever get a trees program, we'll come back to your area because you specifically got a tree removed and see if you want one. Or we'll simply put one in front of your house because we're going to water it, we'll put it there. But again, we want to try to put them anywhere we can, but we certainly want to give the folks that are willing to water it first, give you an option after that. We're going to select where they're going to go. And my first focus would be hit the areas where we eliminated all the trees. And there's some areas that are just barren now because the trees are all gone.
Would on River Road between 2nd and Cordon be one of those areas?
Not likely. Again, we're going to focus within the residential areas.
It's all residential back there.
In front of residential areas. So it doesn't give us a real benefit unless it's in front of the homes.
It's a gateway to our city, and it looks terrible. Okay, with that, I think we can adjourn the meeting tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.